So it is of vital interest for the European Union, which relies heavily on the global trade system, to draw both partners, the US and China, back on the multilateral track and to get the deal we need, not a bilateral deal, but a multilateral deal for the reform of the World Trade Organization. In China, often there is a confusion between multilateralism and multipolarity. These are two very different things. Yes, the world is multipolar. China, US, India, Europe, Brazil, South Africa, Japan, these are poles of influence. Multilateralism is how we make these poles work together and not everyone in its corner. And we think, we the Union, at the multilateral table in New York, in Geneva, that we can bring the world together to find common solutions, but also some negative impacts. And that's life, that's normal. So the question today is, because of this incredible success of China on the world stage, how do we rebuild a balanced order? That's why the Union in Europe say we need to rebalance, to find an order where China feels comfortable, and where all the other partners with China feel also comfortable. Now, there are two issues on the table right now which are at the core of the solutions to be found. One is subsidies, not subsidies as a social investment. All countries subsidize their industrial policy. And WTO recognizes these subsidies. The question is subsidies which distort trade and create these anti-globalization feelings. On this we need to work, and that's why we are negotiating, hopefully for a conclusion next year, what we call a comprehensive agreement on investment, cross-border investment. The second issues we have on the table is, how do we manage to face together the two revolutions of our time, energy transition on one hand, the digital revolution on the other, in a new rule book adapted to development. China say, rightly so, that it is the greatest developing country. But in face of the two revolutions of our time, the 21st century, fight against climate change and digitalization of our economies, isn't Europe a developing region? Aren't all our countries developing? Because development is a good word. And the distinction today between developed and developing is a 20th century concept. It's not a 21st century concept. So we are all developing. So in WTO, preferential trade policies should be reformed in order to take into account the different levels of adaptation to the new realities of our time. And we should be able to distinguish Shanghai of the 22nd century with Guizhou. We should be able to distinguish in Europe Paris, Berlin, Rome with lesser developed regions of Europe. We think in Brussels that there is no bilateral solution to the problems of our times. That is why we observe the US-China negotiation with a grain of salt. Because the question I ask as the ambassador of the Union here is why isn't that negotiation taking place in Geneva with all of us? Shouldn't all of us have a voice to tackle the issues that are being talked today in a bilateral framework? And yes, it has been said this morning, multilateralism is challenged. And this should create in our hearts and in our minds a sense of urgency. Of Paris 2015, everybody at the table. If we cannot have inside WTO everybody at the table, then maybe we could recreate some kind of core, a group of countries who would assume the responsibility to act and to lead. And I'm certain, I'm convinced, I'm confident that China and the Union have an historic responsibility to do so. And I'm sure that many other countries in the world